to cover the story of the Coptic Solidarities, the 13th annual conference defending religious minorities of the Middle East. So let's watch now and go live.
To be engaged like never before. And it also requires us to not be so overwhelmed by all the news that is happening every day to somehow feel that we can't make a difference in areas of human rights and ways to try to make people's lives better. And I want to begin by thanking Coptic Solidarity for inviting me to join you this morning. Congratulations on successfully organizing your 13th conference. I understand you heard from Frank Wolf earlier today, my former colleague, and he's like super, right? I mean, dynamic. Yeah, but my apologies, I was supposed to be here joining you yesterday, and I'm on the Rules Committee, and every bill that goes to the House floor goes to the Rules Committee. So I had to be on the House floor yesterday, and then we had votes. So you would adjourn by the time so I apologize for that, but I'm grateful to be here with you today. I think this afternoon we're going to hear from Sonia Domans, the author of Coptic Solidarity's latest report on the disappearance and forced conversion of Coptic women and girls in Egypt. As I read that report, I was struck by the image of Elham, a 60-year-old who was abducted on her way to school and held for 5 days in 2022. Despite the ordeal Elham and her family endured, 5 long days of uncertainty and fear, her abductor did not face any legal consequences. None. Tragically, Elham's story is not unique. The most recent State Department report on international religious freedom recorded at least 8 cases of alleged abduction and forced conversion of Coptic women and girls in Egypt. And while I believe that the Egyptian security services helped to return some of those women families, it is absolutely unacceptable that the government allows any abduction to go unpunished because of the victim's religion. Article 64 of the Egyptian Constitution says that, I quote, freedom of belief is absolute, end quote. Even so, religious minorities in Egypt face discrimination by law and by practice. For women and girls, this discrimination is often magnified. In Egypt, women are subjugated within their own communities. The law codifies the marital obligations of wives to their husbands and regulates their movement. Expectations of modesty and familial honor serve to further limit women's freedoms. This makes women more vulnerable to coercion and to physical violence. And those who seek to harm religious minority communities often do so by targeting women. Gendered religious discrimination is not confined to Egypt. In Pakistan, religious minorities live with the knowledge that at any time, they may be accused of blasphemy and face violence as a result. My friends in the Maaloof community sadly testify to this. So too can Nadia, a Christian Pakistani swan interviewed by Human Rights Watch. Nadia opened her business, her previous employer threatened her, saying, consequences of this will not be good for you. Soon, a local cleric accused Nadia of blasphemy. He led a mob to Nadia's store where they destroyed her property and beat Nadia and her staff. This is part of a greater trend in Pakistan, in which blasphemy allegations are used to maintain the economic dominance of the country's Sunni Muslim majority. But as Nadia assessed, her agenda played a role in the attack too. She said the fact that I was a single woman and a Christian meant that my accuser realized where I was most vulnerable. These stories are important because they remind us of the human cost of gender discrimination and religious persecution. By stepping into Elham's shoes or Nadia's, we feel a sliver of their pain, and we step a little closer to action. One of the things I appreciate about the people who gather here today is I think you understand that just as important as the statistics and the numbers are, people aren't moved by that. They're moved by the human stories. And we need to keep on telling these stories over and over. And I'll not enough to express concern. And it's not enough for politicians to show up at conferences like this and say, boy, isn't this terrible. The United States has a responsibility. We have a moral obligation, not just as a global leader, but as a nation that values human rights, to act when those rights are violated. That is why it is so heartbreaking to me that the Trump administration has undermined our ability to have policies that actually make things better. We need to be talking about human rights. Human rights need to be a defining centerpiece of our foreign policy. I've always believed that the United States of America stands for anything. We need to stand out loud and foursquare for human rights. We're not expendable. We can't turn a blind eye because it's somehow politically convenient. I mean, what makes us unique is supposed to be our commitment to human rights. In Egypt, for example, USAID was conducting a program to promote tolerance between Muslim and Christian women and girls. Exactly the kind of work that is sorely needed today. Today, USAID's offices sit empty. The administration has looted our toolbox. They've eliminated USAID and called out the State Department's Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. I don't understand why that makes any sense. And I don't say this to create division. If anything, should be insulated from partisanship. It is the realm of human rights. I say this because if we're going to get anything done, if we're really going to change things for women facing religious persecution in Egypt or Pakistan or Iraq or anywhere else, we need to work together, right, to demand that our government stands up for the values that we all believe in. By cutting essential funding to U.S. initiatives designed to promote human rights. By doing that, we are letting down not only the victims of religious persecution, we are turning our back on our own values. You know, look, I've been in Washington for an awful long time. And the one thing I know, and I think you all instinctually know, is that talk is cheap. You know, you can say things to get applause or to get people to think you're on their side, and I get that. But what really matters is the follow, is to making sure that the funding is there so that we actually have the tools and the levers to make a difference. That the response to human rights violations is more than an ante-terrorism, but that we follow up. Sometimes with sanctions, sometimes with stern warnings and admonitions, but with something. And again, we can't let the focus in the centerpiece of our foreign policy, divert from human rights. That's everything. If we do that, we lose a big part of what makes us unique and what makes us great. So I say to everybody here that your stories deserve to be heard. I hope that I can count on you to continue to share your stories with every single member of Congress and every member of this administration that you can find and you can reach out to. You can count on me to keep amplifying them. I'm still the co-chair of the Human Rights Commission, but also in my capacity of being on the Rules Committee, where every bill comes before my committee, before it goes to the floor, I have an opportunity to be able to talk about some of these things, and when it's appropriate. And again, let me just close with this. There's a lot of bad stuff happening, and while we can't change the past, we can all help shape and influence the future. And that's what the purpose of me being here is. And you can count me in as an ally, and I look forward to working with you in the weeks, months, maybe even the years ahead. But from the bottom of my heart, thank you for welcoming me here today, and thank you for all you do.
I think I could use sugar. I guess number 2. خلاص مشاه.
شايف انا غريب ولا متهيألي؟ الصبح
ليه طيب؟
طولت ولا قصرت الموت بقى ولا صح ولا غلط؟ حتى لو جبت
لا بص، حتى هنا ما لناش بنات، يعني حتى هنا ما لناش بنات. هو أمر لمدة 25 سنة وغير شروط واحد تاني هنا؟ عندنا مصر 25 سنة يعني
We have a very special award that we want to present now. I'm going to ask Lindsay to come to the podium and the announcement.
كنت معاك شغل برضه عشان المبادئ.
Thank you. We're improvising just a little bit with the schedule to a member of Congress on the way here. Each year, Congress Solidarity picks someone to give our leadership award to. So I'd like to invite Mark Costa to come up here. Mark, I met 3 years ago. He applied to be an intern in his freshman year of university, and he wrote a first research paper for the organization over resource participation. Not a lot of people do that in their spare time. It was an excellent report that we took to the UN and we distributed widely on our Indigenous rights. And since that time, he has become an invaluable member of the Solidarity team. As you heard about the next report that's being published next week about Egypt's foreign influence, that's also his work. And he's really been just like a huge help with our advocacy work, outreach to congressional offices, with country missions. And for all of that, the whole board thanks you, and that you work with this organization, and that you're going to know you're going to be one of the future Celtic champions. It says, Coptic Solidarity 2025 Leadership Award presented to Mark Basta for being a proactive young leader with outstanding scholarly contributions and spirited advocacy to achieve equality for the Indigenous constitution.
Yes.
Hey again, second time today. I think one of the things that I'd like to say is why I do this work. I'm not a political dissident, I am. I nowhere do this work to overthrow government or speak out against a politician or call out a politician. I'm a political advocate. But I think the one thing that this work is really putting forward the voice for the most unheard, the most persecuted. I think the thing that probably the one thing that I think I'll probably end up with is a few words. It is an Arabic from Hada's poem, and I think that it really just summarizes what I want to say best. إن النهارده هنتكلم أخاف ولا أتأخر حتى لو زايدوا على ضميري أو سموني طماع.
Congratulations, Mark. Okay, our next speaker is here, I believe, and that's Congresswoman Malliotakis. Congressman Malliotakis is currently serving in her third term representing New York's 11th Congressional District, which encompasses Staten Island and parts of southern Brooklyn. Congresswoman Malliotakis is a member of the House of Ways and Means Committee, and as a previous member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, Malliotakis has been a strong voice for American values overseas. She has stood up for allies such as Greece, Cyprus, and Israel against the neighboring authoritarian regimes. Malliotakis successfully inserted language into the National Defense Authorization Act, requiring more transparency regarding Iran's nefarious activities on U.S. soil. And she's helped pass a bipartisan amendment establishing congressional oversight on any sale of F-16 fighter jets and military equipment to Turkey. Malliotakis is the daughter of immigrants. Her father is from Greece and her mother is a Cuban exile of the Castro dictatorship. She is a passionate advocate for animal rights and the strengthening of animal cruelty laws. And in her spare time, she spends it with her Chihuahua Luna. Please help me welcome Congresswoman Malliotakis.
It's so important that you're here in Washington. Members of Congress really need to hear your stories of your loved ones, the stories of our fellow Christians who are, quite frankly, under attack throughout the world. And sadly, this is not happening just in the Middle East, it's happening all over the place, including here in the United States. When we look at some of the egregious, whether it's hate speech, whether it be vandalism on churches, whether it be crimes and attacks. So this is something that we share in common, a concern with this issue. I am someone who's also Orthodox Christian. My father is from Greece, and we share many similarities in our culture, in our religion, and I'm very fortunate to represent a growing number of Egyptian Coptic individuals on Staten Island and Brooklyn. So my buddy Joe is here, one of my constituents. But you know, it's something that we have to stand up against. We need to ensure that our voices are heard. And that is why you being here in Washington, engaging your members of Congress, explaining to them the stories that you know because you are members of the diaspora. That is the most important thing, because you know what your family is going through, you know what your religious communities are going through, and you can share those stories firsthand. And I think that's the most effective way to educate and lobby members of Congress to take action, and we encourage the State Department to step in and try to work out solutions towards religious freedom and peace throughout the world. I want to encourage you to continue to stay in contact with my office. I recently went to Egypt, actually. I was there this was last summer. It seems so not too long ago, but I guess it was long ago. And I was in Egypt, and it's a beautiful country, number one, obviously very historic, and very culturally diverse. It is so incredibly important that we continue to speak with stakeholders, whether it be business leaders, religious leaders, and government leaders. And obviously in our meetings we've encouraged more cooperation with our Egyptian counterparts. We stress human rights and freedom of religion. On the economic issues, obviously there's a lot of financial problems that they're experiencing right now, where we can be helpful and maybe enhance our cooperation enhance trade, we should look to do so. You have the ongoing issue of Ethiopia and water, so we've tried to weigh in on that. We've signed a number of letters coming out of my office encouraging a resolution. And so we're doing what we can to improve the relationships, to strengthen the relationships, to encourage our counterparts in the Middle East to respect religious freedom. And as was mentioned, I've taken quite a strong stand against Iran. I've actually been sanctioned by Iran, which I wear as a badge of honor. But we have to stand up and speak out. And I really appreciate you allowing me to come here to continue our dialogue and our work together. And I'm hoping over the next year when we come back, we'll see much more success to be reporting on.
I think we're ready for our next session.
أنا بالسكن بس أنا بين واحد.
Okay, our next session is Crisis for Christians in Syria. The moderator will be Nina Shea. Just a few words about Nina. Nina is a Hudson Institute Senior Fellow and Director at the Center for Religious Freedom. She was appointed by the House of Representatives to serve as a commissioner of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom in 1999 to 2012. Ms. Shea has been a human rights lawyer for over 30 years. She works extensively for the advancement of individual religious freedom and other human rights in U.S. foreign policy as it confronts incessant Islamic extremism and other authoritarian regimes. She advocates in defense of those persecuted for their religious beliefs and identities, and on behalf of diplomatic measures to end religious repression and violence abroad, whether from state actors or extremist groups. So let's welcome Nina.
It's a real honor to be here. Actually, my Coptic Solidarity 15th anniversary of important conferences, and I think it's very fitting that it's in this historic chamber of the caucus room in the U.S. House of Representatives, because the U.S. is indispensable for advancing religious freedom and human rights, standing up for that. And including in our allied countries, our allied nations like and I have also had the privilege of visiting Egypt and going into St. Mark's Basilica soon after a massacre occurred there, the women's session. And Egypt, as a Catholic Christian, Egypt represents holy land to me, and it was very moving to me to see how Egypt honor their saints, honor their martyrs, have their icons and pictures and honor them. And it's an example to the rest of the world. So, and I think it's wonderful that you are doing this panel on Syria. I'd like to ask my fellow panelists so that I can introduce them. And Syria and Egypt, of course, share much history historically, and the brief period. Syria is also important today because of the extreme challenges there. And we're going to hear from panel experts on Syria. We're going to hear their stories, but we're also Washington and many other bodies, including the UN's Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues on behalf of the Syrian Aid Society of Iraq. And she currently serves as the executive director of that the Syrian International Council. Made a co-chair, made a co-chair of the Global Youth Summit on religious freedom, and the First Freedom Foundation co-chair. And she's also an advocacy ambassador for the Sussex Evangelistic Association Syrian Project. And in her native, home in Southern California, she's active in cultural and humanitarian efforts with the Assyrian American Association. And then finally, we'll wrap up with Brian Morrow, who is a prominent national security and foreign affairs analyst. He is an investigative researcher covering extremist groups at the Capital Research Center. He once served as a volunteer researcher for the Reform Party of Syria, a pro-U.S. group of Syrians that opposed Assad and Islamist extremists. So, with that, David, I'm going to...
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Nina. It's a pleasure to be with you. Solidarity again this year to talk about Christians in the Middle East and specifically in post-Assad Syria. I know there's a lot of concern in the audience and indeed around the world about what the new government of Syria means for Christians in Syria. The Assad regime had a relatively benign approach to minorities, regionally speaking, let's say. Of course, it was a minoritarian government. But we shouldn't forget what he did to the country. So 500,000 Syrians, drove 12 million Syrians or so into exile abroad, including many Christians. Really quite remarkable. Now, al-Shara himself may turn out to be a wolf in sheep's clothing, but he's done a lot of the right things to date. He's met with U.S. congressmen who left meetings reassured, or at least optimistic, that the new government is pragmatic and might be tolerant, and that there'll be some respect for human rights and religious freedom. I wasn't here this morning. I don't know if Representative Waller came by. I testified before the House Foreign Affairs Committee earlier this week, and the Republicans, more than the Democrats, were very optimistic about the trajectory of Syria under al-Shara. But some of the things that are happening really do not inspire confidence. We saw the massacre of Alawites, former regime members targeting the Druze community. We've seen members of designated U.S. designated terrorist organizations that perpetrated atrocities against Kurds being assigned as senior level military officers in Hasaka, in Kurdish areas. And of course, the situation faced by Christians, which the rest of my panelists would know a lot more details about. I'm sure we'll talk about it in detail, what's going on the ground. What I want to talk to you about is how the Trump administration sees the situation and what they can do to protect Christians in Syria. And it's no secret that in general, human rights were not a priority issue for the first Trump administration. Human rights writ large. I did some work on these matters related to Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and some other Middle Eastern states, particularly Iraq, during the first Trump administration. Christians were a priority, though. You recall, Vice President Pence was the real champion of Middle Eastern Christians in the administration, particularly Iraqi Christians. Significant attention was paid to the crisis there, and a lot of funding was directed to Nineveh province, particularly in the aftermath of ISIS. Trump's second administration is not fully staffed up as yet. We've seen Secretary of State and National Security Advisor now, I guess, Marco Rubio make a number of comments about Syrian Christians. He's expressed support for all of Syria's minorities, since not Christians. He said the United States stands with Syria's religious and ethnic communities, including Christian, Druze, Alawites, Kurdish communities, and urged the government to hold perpetrators of violence against minority communities accountable. During a meeting, after a meeting with Shabani, the foreign minister of Syria, once again, Rubio underscored the critical importance of protecting human rights of all Syrians, regardless of ethnicity or religion. But as with the first Trump administration, in the second, I think the real advocate for Christian protection of Christians in the region is going to be also the vice president, J.D. Vance. He's spoken a number of times since he's taken office, and even before, about the situation of Christians in the region. In February 25, he said that part of protecting religious freedom initiatives means recognizing in our foreign policy the difference between regimes that respect religious freedom and those that do not. The United States must be able to make that distinction, and we must be able to look at catastrophes like the plight of Iraq's Christians over the past 3 decades and possess the moral clarity to act when something has gone wrong. He also talked in specific about Syrian Christians in an interview with Laura Ingram. We don't want another Christian community erased from the face of the earth. He said, we're talking already to our allies, and we're doing things in private to try and encourage them to protect the minorities, the Christian minorities, and so forth. The administration is saying the right things. I think they get it. I think we all understand that. They understand the threat to the community. The question is what they're going to do about it. Now, it's still early in the administration. There's nothing I can point to so far that they have actually done. The unconditional suspension of the sanctions in Syria removes some of the administration's leverage vis-a-vis protection of minority rights, and specifically Christian rights. Of course, the administration can always reimpose those sanctions if conditions dictate. It's important that this is on the administration's agenda, and going forward remains a talking point, in particular for Tom Barrack, the U.S. envoy to Syria, and eventually we will likely reopen an embassy there, so on the ambassador's agenda. Interestingly, I think the Trump budget request for 2026 for the State Department indicates cuts for the Bureau of Religious Freedom, of International Religious Freedom. It's a minor cut. The office doesn't have an enormous amount of funding. But I think more importantly, we should look at who they appoint to these key positions. We've got Mark Walker as ambassador at large. Policy is personnel. You need the right people in the right places. We're going to need funding. And we're going to need consistent, high-level attention on these issues. Because things can go bad very quickly. And the administration is going to need to continuously prioritize these issues that I'm confident that they will going forward.
Hear from everyone. So, Hassan.
Thank you, Dina. First, of course, I thank Coptic Solidarity for inviting me to speak here today. But before that, Nina, you didn't have much information, so I will give the background about myself or the audience, more about me, where I'm coming from. So I am a Syrian from northeast Syria. Was born in Damascus, and I studied here in the United States at Catholic University. Went back to Syria in 1993. And in Syria, I became a volunteer for a Syrian human rights organization, Syria, and we get in trouble in Syria. So I was I'm from the Syrian Orthodox Church, my family, and I am a man of faith. I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. So this is also give you an angle where I'm coming from when you hear me speak, you know. So let's get to it. So I would like, as I said, to thank Coptic Solidarity for inviting me to speak at this important and timely event. Thank you for your interest and care for Syria, its people, and its Christian community. You have given me the opportunity today to address a topic that is both deeply personal and politically urgent. The condition and future of Syria's Christian community following the fall of the Assad regime and then the new transition regime up to today. I will speak briefly on the Assad years, because we all lived in the Syrians, whether Christians or other communities. We can speak in more depth. In assessing the conditions of Syrian Christians, I would like, as I said, to begin briefly by speaking about the situation under Assad regime. Syrian Christians were often described as a protected minority. However, this protection came at a cost. It was not based on equal citizenship, but rather on loyalty to authoritarianism. Christians, like other religious and ethnic minorities, were denied independent, meaningful, and effective political representation under Assad. The security they enjoyed was often manipulated as a tool of the regime's propaganda. They were indeed Syrian Christians protected, but in Assad's big Syrian. Consequently, the regime's collapse has left behind both relief and anxiety in the Christian community. Relief that the machinery of oppression has weakened, but anxiety about who will fill the vacuum and what structures will guarantee the rights and freedom of all Syrians, including Christians. It is not enough for Syrian Christians alone to guarantee their rights. All Syrian identity groups must have their rights secured if the country's stability and the people's security are to be sustained. So now we move on to what happened after the Christian community after the fall of Assad. So I was in Damascus for the first time in 14 years after the fall of Assad, part of March, part of April, and I spent most of my time on social media. Since taking office, President al-Shara has signaled commitment to pluralism and national reconciliation. His administration's early steps, such as the inclusion of a Christian figure in the transitional council, a commitment to constitutional reform, and promises of religious freedom, have been important and valuable symbolic gestures. Yet, symbolism, though needed and appreciated, is not enough for communities striving to survive. On the ground, Christian communities face significant challenges in four areas: insecurity, representation, return and reconstruction, and in legal guarantees. Security, as far as security in areas where state authority is weak or contested, Christian villages have reported increased criminality, sectarian especially in parts of Homs and Hama. As far as representation, despite promises, Christians remain underrepresented in local governance and security institutions. Christians are committed to desk jobs in the police institution. Armed Christian police are needed, especially in the regions with Christian residents. Otherwise, equal citizenship and trust is compromised. Return and construction. Many Syrians, including Christian families, particularly those who fled to Lebanon, Europe, and North America, remain hesitant to return. Civil unrest, like what Syria experienced over the last 30 years, takes a greater toll on minority groups who can, as in the case of Syrian Christians, face complete approval. So the legal guarantees. There remains a vacuum in clear legal protection for religious minorities. Without a political framework such as a Bill of Rights, and without a strong independent judiciary, the rule of law, and the protection of Christian property rights and business, Syrian Christians risk soft ethnic cleansing and eventual next, I'm going to look on the reality, as I said, what I found out being in Syria and in Damascus for 3 weeks with the Christian community there. So despite these challenges that I spoke about, Syrian Christians are not passive. They are adapting, evolving, and increasingly engaging in civic and political life. A new generation of Christian youth, many raised amid war and exile, are participating in society with a vision of inclusive citizenship. We see Christians-led NGOs providing an interfaith initiative promoting reconciliation and efforts to draft inclusive local charters that ensures freedom of belief, ask for equal property rights, and minority protection. This shift from a defensive minority posture to active citizenship is perhaps one of the most hopeful signs of this transition. So, what is my conclusion and recommendation? So, for Syria to truly transition toward a pluralistic future, the rights and dignity of all communities must be central, not peripheral, to the building process. And here are key recommendations. First, constitutional guarantees. The new constitution must enshrine full religious freedom, equal citizenship, and the protection of heritage sites and institutions. Second, political inclusion. Christians and other minorities must have proportional representation in governments, especially the local level where they reside. Third, international support. The international community must support minority return programs, protect vulnerable religious communities, and fund neutral civil society initiatives. Finally, fourth, truth and reconciliation. A national healing process must include the stories of all communities, including Christians, who suffered like other Syrians under Assad tyranny and the internal war the last 30 years. In closing, a young Christian lawyer in training summoned it up for me. She told me last summer while I was visiting in northeast Syria, we don't want to hear about democracy anymore. quality, and the dignity that God has put on us. Thank you.
You brought up homes, and I was just reading a report today that there was some militants shot up the facade of the Orthodox cathedral of St. Mary last Sunday to shoot off the cross. So yes, security in that region is going to be throughout the country. It's going to be extremely good. So Assyrian.
First, I'd like to thank Coptic Solidarity for bringing us all together at this beautiful and very impactful conference. It's an honor to join this conversation on Christians in Syria and to speak on behalf of the people whose continued survival is not only under threat, it is being politically, culturally, and demographically dismantled in real time. I am speaking about the indigenous Assyrians of Syria, one of the oldest continuous Christian peoples in the world and one of the most systematically silenced in the region. Assyrians, including Chaldean and Syriac denominations, are the indigenous people of Syria, Iraq, northwest Iran, and southeast Turkey, and have a history spanning over 6,700 years. We speak the language of Christ and have preserved a rich culture and religious identity despite genocide, forced displacement, and religious persecution. Yet today, that resilience is being met not with protection or partnership, but with a different kind of violence, one that is being legitimized by international actors who mistake performance for progress. Governance structures in Syria that claim to uphold democracy and religious freedom are the very ones eroding the existence of the indigenous Assyrian Christians. This includes both extremist actors like Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, led by Ahmed al-Shara, also known as Abu Muhammad al-Tulani, and the Kurdish-led Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, the AANES. Golani has a well-documented history of massacring Assyrians, Yazidis, Ghanaians, and even Americans in Iraq. Today, he is being rebranded and legitimized as a moderate partner. Likewise, the commander of the Syrian Democratic Forces, Mazloum Abdi, was a senior PKK official, a U.S.-designated terrorist organization. While some international actors are now attempting to remove the PKK from this list, their record of violations is clear and well documented. They kidnap children and force them to combat, terrorize Assyrian villages and Yazidi villages, massacre civilians, land grab, and enforce a violent purification process that strips Assyrians of their language, land, faith, and heritage. These are not relics of the past. They are present-day tactics of erasure carried out under a different name and with growing international backing deceived by quickly scotch-taped together narratives. The dissolution of the PKK means nothing when these same abuses continue under other names. The SDF are just a rebranded iteration of the YPG and have further exacerbated the marginalization of Assyrians with their well-documented ties to the PKK. Even U.S. General Raymond Thomas admitted that rebranding was a PR move to secure Western support and funding. Outside of the ANES, HTS militants and students aligned with Salafist ideologies are openly walking through Christian neighborhoods calling for jihad. This may only be rhetoric for now, but we've seen what happened to the Alawites and the Druze. These threats often go unreported by mass media and unpunished, but they are deeply felt and well documented by communities on the ground. My own family has experienced this type of extremist violence firsthand. My cousin was killed by ISIS on publicly broadcasted footage. Another family member whose name and relationship I cannot share because the perpetrators returned to our village and resumed life unpunished as our neighbors. They were captured, beaten, and sold by 8 different Kurdish ISIS factions. Each demanded ransom in Kurdish and tormented our family with threats that his body would be thrown at our doorstep. He survived only through the intervention of the U.S. government, as he was a U.S. citizen, who worked with the Kurdish religious leader and used phone data obtained by TAP Communications to confirm that the perpetrators were local Kurdish villagers they knew by name. The night ISIS entered Assyrian villages, the Khabur River swelled, and in the chaos, high-ranking Kurdish officials rushed to seize land and vanished. They set up offices in Assyrian homes while families feared for their lives. When confronted and asked why they were not fighting, multiple members of my family were told point blank, we will not sacrifice ourselves to be Christians. We saw this in Iraq where the Kurdish Peshmerga, or those who fight death, disarmed the Syrians and Yazidis 2 weeks before ISIS and abandoned 7 critical posts without firing a single bullet, leading us to slaughter, only coming back to follow Western forces and paint a picture of protection. How are we expected to place our faith in regimes like this? How can the world believe they are our defenders? Those who leave us to slaughter in silence while building false narratives as our protectors will never be guardians of peace because they are among the many architects of our erasure. International actors hail the Kurdish administration as a sanctuary for Christians, promoting a future Kurdish state built on the bones of indigenous Christians and branding a beacon of tolerance in a fractured region. But like the fig tree Jesus cursed, lush in appearance yet barren at its core, this administration wears the guise of protection while ripping out the very roots of indigenous Assyrian Christian existence. On the ground, Assyrians are not equals. They are threatened into silence or risk disappearance and death. Our schools were shut down for refusing to adopt a politicized curriculum that glorifies the PKK, rewrites Assyrian history, and turns education into an instrument of indoctrination. 15% of Assyrian lands in the AENES-controlled areas have been confiscated. Over 1,400 homes and farms remain illegally occupied in the Khaba River Valley. The SDF digs trenches on our churches and cemeteries, militarizing our sacred Christian spaces to provoke brutal, relentless Turkish retaliation. We don't want war where we worship. We don't want to be pawns in someone else's war. We don't want our churches turned into battlegrounds to manufacture illusions that one regime protects us while another attacks us, manipulating our suffering for Western backing at the expense of our existence. We saw this with the Mostawa Church in Tel Aviv in 2022. And in 2024, AP shared footage of the AENES releasing ISIS prisoners under the guise of reintegration and false claims of rehabilitation, triggering renewed fears across vulnerable Assyrian villages. And when our leaders resist, they are silenced, just like David Jindu was when he was assassinated by YPG militants in 2015. To this day, not one prosecution, not even a public investigation has taken place. Because in these systems, Assyrian blood is not considered evidence. It is treated as disposable. Assyrians, like the song mentioned, are not passive victims. We have expertise and leadership and the will to build a stable future. But we are being denied the space and security to do so. What we need now is a shift in how stability and representation are conceptualized in this region, because constitutions are just words on paper when the reality on the ground is so much different. It is time to move beyond symbolic engagement and toward enforceable structures of protection, and that begins with the creation of a locally administered Khaba region for Assyrians. This would not be an enclave of separation. We don't want to balkanize Syria, but we want a foundation for sustainability where Assyrians can manage local governance, education, security, and cultural preservation without fear of interference or demographic manipulation. International aid, oversight, and recognition must support this initiative, not as a favor, but as an overdue corrective to decades of disenfranchisement. There is legal precedent for this. Under the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous peoples have the right to self-determination, including autonomy over their internal and local affairs. The establishment of an Assyrian-administered Khaba region would be a model of peaceful coexistence and what sustainable localized governance could look like in a post-conflict Syria. Assyrian Christians are being erased not by war alone, but by policies endorsed by international support. And if that silence continues, we will become a footnote in a country that's named after us. We do not ask to be rescued, we just want to be recognized. We want our indigenous rights. We want human rights. We cannot have meaningful conversations about protecting Christians if we are not listening to genuine Christian voices. Those who are not speaking under the very real threat of death in front of the very regimes persecuting us. We do not ask the Taliban on the status of women. We don't ask Iran about the Baha'is. So why do we ask the Kurdish administrations or the Syrian government or the Iraqi government on the treatment of Assyrians? We've seen what happened to David Jindu and Ilyas Nasir, and we are still seeing our men kidnapped in broad daylight, like Gabi Samir Lakbo by the Kurdish administration, justified and every road of our homeland is once more fractured, and regimes continue to pave over our freshly dead, bloody bodies. A community who still speaks the language of Jesus and whose evangelistic force spread Christianity from India to China will be a footnote in history. These abuses are happening now. Not just yesterday, not just 10 years ago, 100 years ago, 2,000 years ago, today. Today it's happening, before these regimes even gain full legitimacy. If this is how these regimes act while still vying for international recognition, how much worse will it become when they are legitimized with formal governance or statehood? What will they do with full legitimacy if this is what they already do in daylight? If we care about protecting Christians, we must stop applauding the hands that strangle us. Stop funding the systems that erase us, and start standing with the people who have historically fought for all marginalized groups and now have been abandoned to fight alone, just to stay alive while the world turns away from us and tokenizes their suffering to advance their corrupted agendas. Thank you.
This one's working now. Okay. Maybe I'll use it. First of all, it's great to be back. I was here some years ago or whatever, and I had a great time. Developed some really good friendships, and I am a fan of your organization. I'm glad to hear that you're still out there fighting, even though your issue isn't in the headlines anymore. So I know that's a very difficult thing to try to fight through, because you need that attention in order to get the oxygen that you need in order to make a difference. So I honor you for pushing through that. I remember writing as far back as 2003 or 2004 that there was soon going to be this chain reaction of regimes falling across the Middle East. One would happen, one would fall. And then very rapidly, that would then trigger another, and another. I didn't know where we would be. I knew it was going to happen. And I warned if we did not start identifying and developing allies who weren't Islamist extremists, also weren't extremist dictators, we would be stuck in a situation where we would have no options. We would just have to choose between numerous terrible options. And unfortunately, it seems to be the situation we've ended up in. There are some allies on the ground, but it's not what it could have been. It's not what it should be. And unfortunately, the Coptic Christians in Egypt will pay a price. Even though we're talking about Syria, jihadists don't talk about Coptic Christians versus Assyrians. They talk about Christians. They feel they're in a fight with Christians in Syria. They will feel they are in a fight with Christians in Egypt and Lebanon and everywhere else. And so the price to pay, if we allow HTS or a splinter of HTS or any other to rise up in Syria, is that some of them want to make a name for themselves. And they will look, as jihadists so often do, the Coptic Christians as the prey that can make them famous. And they're going to want to be the new big bad guys on the block by being the ones to take it to the Christians in Egypt and say, oh, this is part of a common front. That is what is going to happen. And so I'm worried about particularly the Sinai Peninsula. But the reality is that everyone in this room knows that. But if you look at media coverage about the interim government situation in Syria, you know this was all talked about until Assad fell. You know, this is the situation we're going to end up in. All of a sudden, it's all this optimistic talk, and it's being obscured by groups, particularly 501c3 nonprofits in the United States, who are giving Ahmed al-Shara the fastest makeover of a public figure I have ever seen in my career over 20 years. I never thought I would go through a day where a former leader of the Al-Qaeda branch in Syria, with maybe hours difference between when he was officially Al-Qaeda and no longer was, could suddenly be celebrated as a guy who saw the light. Hollywood studios for celebrities can't pull that off. They usually have to go away for a while and then come back. Not this guy. He's an Al-Qaeda official, didn't he? Groups like the Syrian American Council, the Syrian Emergency Task Force, the Syria, the various Arab and Islamic groups in the US who are reinventing him are the same exact ones who always told us that the moderate solution in the region and in Syria especially was the Muslim Brotherhood and Turkish dictator Erdogan. Same exact guys saying those are your allies. Well, how'd that turn out? How do you like the situation right now? So we've seen this playbook. We don't have to guess about this. It's the same people saying the same type of thing, just applying it to a different partner of theirs. Now, of course, to whatever degree Ahmed al-Shara has matured, as he said, and grown up, and become more pragmatic, maybe there's some incentives that will make him not be as horrible. We should welcome that. Always welcome things that go in the right direction. Positive reinforcement's important. But that doesn't mean you have to capitulate to a terrorist who, frankly, I'm not even sure he's going to be there in power in a few years. I mean, I'm hearing people talk about this interim government as if they won an election already and are going to be in power for 20 years. Better deal with them and accept them. Well, what is his political constituency? Can anybody tell me? Because the Al-Qaeda type Salafists hate him because he, to his credit, his forces after he left Al-Qaeda did fight an Al-Qaeda affiliate, so they don't like him. He's not extreme. The other Salafists will, and he's a Salafist himself, will call him an apostate who deserves death because he is participating in democracy and elections, and he calls it democracy, and that's a man-made process. The punishment for that is death. All right, so he lost that constituency. So who's left? Oh, the Muslim Brotherhood? Now maybe he's moving in that direction because he's been so successful. They're not going to accept him either. Because he's talking about normalizing ties with Israel, and even if it's a trick, he's gone way too far. He's taken a step beyond what they would even say is permissible by deception. Some of the stuff that he's saying. He has reportedly a pretty positive relationship with the Saudis, not as close as he does with Turkey, but that's there. So the Muslim Brotherhood's going to hate him. He's not pro-Hamas enough for them. So he doesn't have that constituency. So who's left? The minorities? The secular, more minded Sunnis? You think they're going to accept him? You think they're going to accept the former Al-Qaeda leader? That's not happening either. So his task is to somehow, overnight, develop a political constituency, a personality cult. And he has to do that before all of these factions turn on each other and turn on him, and the whole thing falls apart. So let's not gamble our security and the well-being of the population on this idea that he's definitely going to be in power. Because if there's anything that we've learned since Arab Spring began, is that the leader that looks secure today very well may not be there tomorrow. And that's exponentially more true in Syria. So what does that mean, though, for the Christians and the other minorities that are in Syria? If it does start falling apart? Well, mostly everybody, if they feel comfortable saying it, will say, you know what? They're going to be wiped out. They're going to be massacred. There's going to be a quick genocide. Bloody one that you hear about. Or it'll be one that you don't hear about. Slow-moving genocide, where tyrannical policies prevent them from growing, expanding, forces them to move out, forces them to lose their faith. Those are two things I can go here. I don't accept either of those. It's our choice whether that happens or not. When you say that those are your choices, that becomes your choices. So I'm not going to say it. And here's why I hope. My background is in intelligence analysis and forecasting, and there's some trends that I think are often missed. What's the global trend? Economics, culture, religion, politics, international community, religion, even borders. But what is that trend? It's towards decentralization and self-determination. The power of individuals and local communities is rapidly increasing. Populations who don't even have the freedom to operate are somehow overthrowing governments. Information blockades are being broken by VPNs. Activists who don't have privacy rights communicate through military-grade encryption apps on their phones. Bans on guns are being gone around by 3D printed guns. And cheap Ukrainian drones are destroying, to the tune of billions of dollars, the mighty and massive Russian military. So you say, well, can the Christians defend themselves? Well, look at the trend. Hell yeah, they can. So can the other minorities. And that's where the trend is going. That those populations are increasingly able to defend themselves, defend each other, and craft their own futures. What that means is that centralized government, like HDS or any other one, are going to increasingly lose power faster, faster, and faster. And you're seeing the results of that. The Jewish minority had their own autonomous state from 1921 to 1936. You're watching that come right back before our eyes. Whether you want to call it that or not, that's what's happening. And Christians live within those new unofficial borders. I think you're going to see the same thing happen in the Alawites. They had their own autonomous state from 1920 to 1936. In fact, I think it's inevitable. There's a Christian population there. And you need to accept that inevitability, prepare for it, and shape it, instead of just resisting it. Saying, well, it's not polite in diplomatic circles to talk about a future where Syria is not united. Now, if for diplomatic reasons we have to consistently declare our commitment to united Syria, I actually understand that. Go ahead and do it. But that doesn't mean that you should take away your own options by ignoring what the trend tells you is about to happen. Because you know what? The Iranian regime, Hezbollah, the former Assad regime elements that are in Russia, almost certainly backed by Russian government, know that's the future. Look at their information operations. Look at their terrorist operations, their intelligence operations, all of that that's going on in that area along the coast. They are positioning themselves very predictably to tell Syria's minorities, especially the Christians and people who care about the Christians in the West, that they are the moderates. Same trick again. That if you want to say genocide, guess what? We're the only ones that are willing to go in there and stop. You're not like us. It's better than Al-Qaeda, it's better than ISIS, it's better than those guys. That's the game plan they're already talking about, and you can see it in their own chats, their own media. So, I would argue that instead of resisting the inevitable trend, the U.S., Israel, and our allies should accept reality and welcome the birth of an Alawite and Druze majority autonomous regions or even independent countries and partner with them now. Help them build the local forces that they need to, so that they don't get stuck with that same choice that we got ourselves stuck in. We have to choose between a bunch of bad guys to protect you. Stop doing the same thing over and over again. And in making this case, particularly about talking to the administration, I point out that the Mediterranean coast of Syria has tremendous economic opportunities. So those who support the Christians, the Alawites, the Druze, and develop a new future for themselves, have a lot to gain. They can't offer a new Air Force One, but if they have to, they can offer new Trump Towers. They can offer new Trump dollars. That's the language we've got to talk about. That politicians and American companies can benefit from the economic prosperity that would come with excluding the Iranian regime, the former Assad regime, the Russians, HDS from the area. If that's what we got to do, then that's an argument that we got to make. What this also means is the decentralization trend is that the Kurdish regions of Iraq, Syria, and even Iran will increasingly become in power also. That's another inevitable trend that we have to seize instead of deny that it exists. Malcolm said two key things. He said, and most directors I talked to agree with this. There should be an autonomous province or region for the Christians, the Yazidis, and the other minorities in Iraq. That seems obviously, it's bizarre that that's happening. But I'm also going on record saying an independent Kurdistan should be the official objective of U.S. foreign policy. Maybe not everyone agrees with me on it, but it's kind of inevitable. And there are enough pro-American elements there that, just like in any other situation, I would say try to empower those, try and shape the situation instead of just saying you don't like that outcome, that you're not going to do this. In 2017, I went on Fox and Friends when we knew Trump was probably watching this. He was watching right before it went on, he was watching shortly after. He was distracted out of it. We knew his speech was watching. And I criticized him for not protecting the Kurds and the Syriac Military Council Christians from Erdogan, who was bombing them at the time. So my record is clear. I'm a friend of the Kurds. I care about them. When I went to Iraq and Kurdistan, I talked to Christians living there who told me how much they appreciated the Kurdish treatment of them. But I also went to Karakush. I was with that one. I met with the Assyrian Christians. They had a different experience. I've talked to Christians had good experiences with Kurds. I've also talked to ones that have had bad experiences with Kurds. And I don't believe, even though I'm friends with the Kurds, that all the Christians who have negative experiences with Kurds are making it up for just no apparent reason. The incentive doesn't exist. And so I don't hear anyone here from the Kurdish regional government or someone that works with the Kurdish government. If you don't want to identify yourselves, I understand. I'm not coming to criticize you. But I think they need to hear a message. And that's, first of all, thank you for being America's best ally on the ground in Iraq and Syria. You have an opportunity to create a new era for the Kurdish people, for your life, to rightly pierce the darkness that has plagued the Middle East for so long. But Muhammad Gandhi, who succeeded in making India independent and great, just like he will for Kurdistan, said the true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. Your path to greatness runs alongside the Christians, not through the Christians. Every country and state has imperfections. If Christians who have negative experiences with Kurds, or even other Kurds have negative experiences with you and your government, they disagree about something, and they're not allowed to be publicly heard. They don't feel like they can come to you with a problem. And that you care enough to actually leave them and work together to try to address it, then that bright light that you have will dim and eventually will fade right back into the darkness. Okay, I got one paragraph. And to everyone who is Coptic, I want to thank you as a non-Arab American Christian for inspiring me with your faith, for not turning to the same hatred and brutality that's afflicted you. And I urge you to shape the future, not to surrender to it, for the sake of yourselves, my sake, for the sake of the United States, the region, and the entire world. Thank you.
There's a full agenda. Yeah. Okay. Right. We didn't get to talk about ISIS, which is another looming problem there in Syria. So, no, want to flag it for. We can just do a lightning round, maybe. So there's tens of thousands of ISIS and militants in prisons and their family members in camps in Syria. I understand that it's growing. They're recruiting actually from the region, but also, especially as they see Sharab with his trim beard and his clothes, and he's changed. They're one of the people that maybe buy into his sudden change. And also the ranks of the Salafists from the HTS, who are roaming the streets and intimidating the minorities and Sunnis as well, who don't go along with them. They're recruiting successfully. So what do we do? I'd like to ask the panelists, sort of a lightning round, very quickly. What do you see as a solution to this ISIS presence in Syria?
I mean, it's the whole panel itself. The Shara solution, which actually is backed by the United States government, is to incorporate the foreign fighters, the jihadis, the Islamist extremists in the military, and to put them into one unit and spread out other officers in high-ranking positions. I think this is kicking the can down the road. It's delaying the problem, not solving it. These people are always going to pose the problem. I don't think you can, frankly, extradite or expel the Uyghur fighters that helped liberate Syria from Assad. You can't send them back to China to be murdered by the Chinese regime. You could put them on farms and let them have a normal life in Syria, but that's a fairy tale. I don't think we have a good solution for this. We want Shara to succeed at having a moderate you is that if he doesn't succeed, what comes next will be worse.
Yes, this has been a difficult question to believe. It's not a new question. How to deal with ISIS. I mean, we had to face it as Syrian Christians when they started to move on regions where we had a population like, you know, the Syrian Khabur Valley and then also Hasaki. They wanted to really take over the area. And the only we had our backs as Christians against the wall, and the only solution was SDF. That was, you know.
That's changing. The plan is to change that, to take it from the SDF forces possibly to transfer it to us.
So, right, so now we're going back to what happened during the Obama years, where they said the solution would be to support Islamists who will be moderate, you know, and who will fight them. But in the past, they never fought. They took the support and didn't deliver. So, you know, you'll be the judge. And
I think what happened in Idlib is a good example of where HTS is going to go for the future of Syria. And it's dangerous that we went from one violent, oppressive, extremely violent, actually, dictator to now a terrorist leader. We just need to stop legitimizing these kinds of mentalities and allowing them to take power. We need to promote religious freedom. We need to promote peaceful coexistence that starts with tapping into the education and ensuring there's no external interference, there's no indoctrination of these kinds of ideologies. Because as we've been seeing now, following the Alawite Druze massacres, we're even seeing Salafist ideology in university students when they're going into these Christian neighborhoods and calling for jihad. We need to really back the vulnerable communities, whether they're indigenous or religious minorities, and really give them a platform to participate in governance, and not just on paper, but actually have a voice without external interference. We need to back them so we actually can have coexistence.
Yeah, local self-defense forces, local community empowerment.
Well, thank you very much. On our taking here, just see you all to Congress now. Thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts and insights. And thank you all.
Okay, so we'll just keep going. Our next session is actually an interview that's going to be moderated by President of Coptic Solidarity, Carlinos. So we'll be able to those interviews.
Like, okay, you can come. Are you sure you want to stop staying?